Hello and welcome to CobaltRetroShop. Hope you're having an amazing day. Today we have a Windows desktop. Why? DOSBox. That's why. Today I'm going to go through the general setup of DOSBox Vanilla. There's a few different versions of DOSBox at this point. Some of them are easier to use than others, but honestly this is the version that I prefer, at least for some more basic things. Real quick though, why would you want to screw around with DOSBox? Well, mostly for games, but there are a ton of games and software out there, not just games, but a bunch of different kinds of software that you might want to use for one reason or another that aren't easily ran on modern versions of Windows. And even if your modern version of Windows can run a program, there can be all sorts of compatibility errors and just things not quite working right, specifically because certain programs are programmed to use specific functions of DOS. It can be really frustrating sometimes. So that's what emulation software like DOSBox aims to fix, is to add a lot more of the DOS compatibility back into your machine while still being a contained program. This is the website for the vanilla DOSBox. You can see here it hasn't actually been updated in quite a while, but in its defense, DOSBox is fairly feature complete. Possibly in a future video I can show you guys how to install like Windows 3.1 because that is possible. There are some things that the vanilla version of DOSBox could use to make that process easier, but for just general DOS usage, it's actually not that bad, especially if you dive into the configuration file over here. This is the DOSBox configuration file, and as you can see here, it has a ton of options for resolution, languages, the kind of graphics card you want to use, if you want to use a frame skip utility, various scalars, various CPU settings, sound stuff, blah blah blah, and all the way down here we actually have what is essentially an auto exec. Now, if you're not familiar with how DOS works, one of the things that DOS does to help save some settings and commands for when you're starting up the machine is putting a bunch of stuff in an autoexec.bat file. And this is basically just a set of commands that you can put into a file that DOS will run immediately. Or sometimes programs can do that if they need a specific driver running at the start of the machine. Right here we actually have a completely vanilla, untouched copy of DOSBox, and I'm going to show you how to set this up. So to get started here, I actually have a pre-done directory here. To get started, you have to mount a directory that's on your hard drive in this program so that DOSBox can see it like it's its own hard drive. DOSBox does not have a predefined space by default. It's up to the user for this version to do it themselves. Some other variations of DOSBox might have some default option, but the vanilla version 0.74 does not. We type in mount, the letter of the drive, in this case C, and then the actual path to that folder. If I can type that correctly, that'd be great. DOS. Now, DOSBox, as you may have seen on their website here, go to the downloads page, they actually do have a lot of different platforms available. We got Mac OS X, Windows, of course, Fedora, Debian, FreeBSD, RISC-OS, Gen 2, OS2, a bunch of different platforms. If you have a platform, it can likely run DOSBox if it's powerful enough. But I'm just pointing this out as some of these operating systems may handle DOSBox a little bit differently. As, for example, in Mac OS and Linux, they're not mounted on like C drives. They're mounted at like the root of the system. So for Linux, you'd have to go /mnt / blah blah blah, or for Mac /users / blah blah blah, instead of C:/users blah 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 for Windows. So in that way, the Windows specific version can differ a little bit from some of these other versions. So just keep that in mind. Your paths may look different. But no matter what system you're using, the path within the software is going to look like a Microsoft path just because that's how DOS works. So once you got your path here, you just type in C:, and that will tell the program to switch to your new quote-unquote C drive. So in here, if you type in dir to display the directory, you should see here I have a few things. I have a Windows directory, I have an others directory, and I have a games directory with a couple other things on top there. My main focus for software like this is games, so I'm going to go ahead and cd change directory into games. And you can see I've actually navigated to my games folder. This is where knowledge of using Windows command line, or if you're familiar with DOS itself, that's where knowing that kind of operating system can help you out here. Because this is essentially an open source version of DOS, and it uses most of the same commands, if not all of the same commands. As you were already able to see, I was able to change directory into another one and view the contents. It's exactly like it is on normal DOS. Now, if you've already picked up on this channel, if you've seen a couple of my other videos, you know that I like Doom. And Doom on DOSBox is actually where I cut my teeth with Doom. I actually remember sitting in one of my high school science classes back in the day towards summer break, just chilling on my tablet and playing DOS Doom. I can cd into the Doom directory here. We can take a look inside it. Looks like we got a lot of stuff here. So the two types of files you'd normally see to run things are .exes, which is executables, and then .coms, which is commands. Both kind of essentially do the same thing, but there's like file stuff to make things different. I don't fully understand what the difference is, but they kind of do the same thing. We're looking for executable files and command files, which typically lets you start playing the game. First things first, we're going to run the setup utility. So sometimes when you start configuring a program to use in DOSBox, you're probably going to need to set up some kind of sound and or music setup, as there's a lot of different sound cards out there, and back then, sound cards, much like graphics drivers, didn't have like a universal way to communicate with the machine. If a sound card or a graphics card or whatever was to be supported by a game, it would have to be hard-coded into the game itself to support that hardware. So essentially what that means is if your sound card was not on this list, you're not getting sound or music. So you can see on the right-hand side here, if we get out of DOSBox and scroll up to the sound settings, by default, DOSBox is configured to use a sound blaster. And AdLib might also work out of the box, but I don't recall, but probably. As Sound Blaster, I believe, was AdLib compatible. I'm not 100% sure, though, so don't quote me on that. So, but if you want the Sound Blaster sound, or you just want to get your program more in line to what DOSBox default configuration, you're gonna want Sound Blaster, we're going to want port 220, and then the sound effects, we're going to do the same thing with Sound Blaster, port 220, and IRQ 7. I think by default Doom is configured for IRQ 5. I think a lot of things are pre-configured for IRQ 5, so I'm not sure why DOSBox has it on 7, but we're just going to roll with that. And we're going to go ahead and save the parameters and run Doom. There we go. I hear sound. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, now we can just play Doom like normal. It actually looks not super unlike Doom as I played it on the Xbox. However, it's definitely made more for DOS's restrictions rather than modern platforms. And this specific version I have, or DOSBox's interpretation of mouse movement, has me with the ability of not only moving with the mouse, but looking with the mouse. Which is kind of cool, and a little bit weird. I thought there was a button somewhere around here. Maybe I'm not seeing it. Ooh, maybe that's not in this particular version of Doom. Okay, never mind then. Yeah, I remember in the Xbox version, there was some kind of green liquid down there. I don't know why that's different. Okay then. Okay, that door doesn't open. Okay, and there should be some enemies in this room. There we go. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm just getting distracted and playing some Doom at this point. But let's finish setting up DOS here, as we are not quite done. I mean, as it is right now, we could just use it. But there's one more usability thing that we've got to do to get this to work the way that I personally would expect DOSBox to work. Remember in the beginning how we defined a mount point for this software? Well, like you might have guessed, by default, DOSBox does not do that by default. Even the very first time you mount a path as a drive in DOSBox, it does not save that. So, if you remember the auto-exec from earlier, just in case it didn't go through, this is basically a little file that DOSBox uses to launch programs that you define at the launch of DOSBox. And oftentimes with standard versions of DOS, programs can also put things in the auto-exec file if they require some kind of driver going on in the background, or maybe it's an antivirus and they just start up with the system, something like that. So in our case, we can just put in our mount directions here, MOUNT C colon, as my path is C colon / DOS. Actually, we don't need that colon there. That's going to mess things up. And then, if you don't want to start in that Z directory that's by default in DOSBox, we can just type C colon. And that tells DOSBox to go directly to the C drive. And if you want it even more and if you want the initial DOSBox startup hidden at all, you can go ahead You can even add one more line and type CLS, and that will clear the screen. So let's go ahead and save this text file. I'm going to go ahead and close DOSBox real quick. And just so that we are clear, on the Windows version of DOSBox, it comes with an options quote-unquote program which just brings up this text file. So that's how I got there with Windows. So we're going to go ahead and launch DOSBox again. And you can see here, instead of that whole welcome to DOSBox window it had going on there, thank you NVIDIA, it just goes to a blank C prompt. And you can see here, if we type in dir for directory, here's all our stuff. So, in a nutshell, that's how you set up DOS in DOSBox. Again, there are more user-friendly versions of DOSBox, some other derivatives that are more meant for GUI stuff. Things are a little bit more user-friendly, but if you just want the most bare-bones DOSBox possible, here it is. I think sometime in the future I'll look into some other DOS stuff, like installing Windows 3. But until then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and you can check out some of the links I have in the description, including my own music, the music from Happy to Be Here, the CobaltRetroShop, and the Cobalt Retro Tech Patreon page that starts at $1 a month. Speaking of the Patreon page, I do have to thank Kilo supporters Indian Mac and Cody from Happy to Be Here for supporting the channel. Your support makes Cobalt Retro Tech possible. Thank you. And with all that being said, I'll see y'all in the next one.